Good morning, Father's House. Well, it's March 29th, 2020. As I've seen on Facebook and other places, it's like maybe we ought to reboot 2020 and start over, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen, does it? So I guess we're going to just have to look at this Sunday and get ourselves ready and prepared to kind of have a little conversation about some things that I really think are pertinent to today. But before you do that, I think you probably want to go get your cup of coffee. I know it's early in the morning. Although some of you have been up since 6, I know others of you are late arrivers or late risers. And if that's the case, then you might want to go get yourself a cup of coffee or tea or Postum or whatever it is that you drink. I know that there's some people from other faith communities that watch us as well, and particularly some LDS people and Penny's family. And we want to welcome you today as you join us as we talk about some of the things spiritually that are going on in the world. And rather than looking at it in the physical and the natural, we're just looking at it in the spiritual. So we want to say welcome here. Welcome to joining us, as well as some other people that may not believe in God, other faith traditions, Roman Catholics and such. We want to welcome everybody because the Father's House motto is love's arms open wide. So that's being our motto. We want to encourage you to just be a part of our community today as we talk about some different things. But before we do that, I want you to realize that as a congregation, and this being our Sunday morning service, that we still need finances for us as a congregation to be able to survive and to go on. The bills don't go away. The power we still have to pay, although that's down, and we've cut that back substantially, I'm sure. The watering bill will be what it is. It's raining, so that's good. That bill will go down while it's raining. But we still have to keep the power on, and the furnace is kind of up under minimal setting, and also the refrigerators and different things. So there are expenses that we have there. We have our taxes, we have our insurance, we have all of that stuff that just doesn't go away. That's why it's important now for us all, if you would, to help us with that, and by your giving, and by my giving and our collective giving. It's the idea, once again, that it's not one or two people that make a difference at the Father's House. Whether it has to do with us serving people, whether it has to do with us, our children's ministry, our youth, young adult ministry, our ushers and our greeters or pastoral staff. It's not so much what one person does or what maybe 5 people do. It has much more to do with what we all do. And our time of giving is a time really when we all contribute and we all can contribute. I know that some can contribute more than others, and I want to thank you for that because there's a lot of people out there right now that they just can't give. And I understand that. But if you can help the Father's House out, it would be wonderful. There's really 2 ways that you can give. You can send a check or a money order made out to the Father's House, and you can mail it to our address, which is 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Again, the Father's House, 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. The other thing that you can do is you can go to the fathershouse.org webpage, again, thefathershouse.org, and there you'll see there's a giving button that will be up on your right as you go up into there. And then you can give electronically, and I want to promise you that that's very secure. I want to talk with you for a moment, though, about your Christian spirituality during this time. And the reason I want to bring that up is because it's at a time like this, and it was kind of what we talked about last week. So let's kind of recap. So the last 2 weeks ago, talking in the book of Job, we talked kind of about the idea that Job lost everything. And in losing everything, we posed the question of, it's really a theological term about the word is theodicy, or the goodness of God. And so, if we're thinking about the goodness of God, there's always this question that begs to be answered. And that question is, if God is good, why is there evil in the world? And I want to tell you that none of us have an answer to that question completely. We never will have that. But there's some things that we know, and we understand that God is good. He will always be good because he couldn't be anything other than that in his nature. And at the same time, he made us these biological beings that well, we can corrupt. We're corruptible. We die. We get sick. And that's just a part of nature that it just goes with nature. And so it's something that is a reality for all of us. We know that we're going to live. We know that we're going to have these great days, this great time, but we also know we're going to experience sickness. And we know that ultimately that nobody has ever escaped death and that we're all going to die one day. The good news is that Christ was the firstborn, the resurrected one of a new creation, of which we're a part of as we put our faith and our trust in Jesus Christ and the promise that he's going to get that done for us in the future. Last week we talked about Job when he talked about in that text in Job, really kind of picks up in Job chapter 3, verse 25 is kind of when it starts, but it kind of picks up steam at 28 when he says, "That which I have feared has come upon me." So last week we talked about the fact that that which we feared is upon us. It's here. There's nothing that we can do. A lot of us have feared a pandemic. A lot of us had feared a market meltdown. We feared that we could get some kind of a disease or a virus that nobody could take care of, and or there's a potential of us being very sick or dying. Those of us that are getting close to retirement or have retired and we've got our money in 401ks or in IRAs or any other investments, just knowing that when something like this happens and we see the bottom fall out of the market, that our finances that we wanted to be sure and certain maybe have dwindled some. And so we talked about the fact that fear and that which that Job feared came upon him, it's upon us, and we could do one of two things. We could either run from it, because human nature, or even an animal, because we've been endowed with this emotion of fear for our protection. And so there's two things we do. It's either a matter of fight it or flight. Now, we can run from everything if we want to and try to hide out, but this virus has caught up with us, and we realize that we can't run from it forever, and so we're going to have to face it like a giant. We're going to face it together. And that's really where we are today. I mean, I understand we're sequestered in our homes, really across the nation, and I think across the world. But in reality, this day has to end. If the doctors would have it, they would have us all stay home until this virus was eradicated off the planet. But that's not going to happen. This virus we'll probably live with for the rest of our lives, and our children will live with it, and who knows how far. It's not going to go away in as a one-time event. I think that we're going to find this virus is year after year going to be there, the same way that the flu's there. So we're going to understand more about it. We're gaining more understanding as a world, but it's a reality in which we live. So we're going to have to fight it. We're going to have to stand against it, and we're going to have to move forward. Well, what does that moving forward look like? Well, many of us can stay sequestered in our homes or social distancing, but there's a lot of us that can't do that. We can't do that because we don't have the money to pay our rent. We can't do that because not only do we not have money for our rent, for our house payment, sure, now maybe there's going to be some forbearance on some of those things, but we still have to eat. We still have to pay our health insurance. We still have to have gas so we can get around and do the things that we need to do. And some of us still, quite frankly, have to work. So the day will come in the future, and I don't think it will be months, but probably weeks, where we're going to have to resume life as normal. So I want to say that in the midst of doing that, realize that there's a couple of things that we ought to consider. The first thing is that if you can stay home and work from home for a while, that's probably a wise thing to do. I know you want to get out, I know, but it might be wiser for you to stay home. The second thing that you might do, if you can do that, would be great, is if you have to go to work, is remember this idea of social distancing. So just give people their space. realize that. And if you find yourself sick, stay away from people or maybe stay home, because it may not be the coronavirus, but it could be the flu, but it could be a cold. But at the same time, even I think that we've taken for granted that you go to work when you have a cold because, after all, that's what Americans do. But that might not be the wisest thing for us to do, given today's climate, any more so than it was 2 years ago for us to do that. We really probably shouldn't have been doing that. So those are things that we're going to have to do, and just going to have to navigate through those things. When we open back up for church, many of us will be back attending church. I realize that a few of the members of the Father's house are not going to want to attend church because they don't feel comfortable yet attending church. If that's your case, then by all means we would want you to stay home, because we would never want you to coerce you or compel you to come to an environment that you didn't feel comfortable coming to. So that's just a bridge that we'll cross when we get to that bridge. But I want us to think here a little bit about, in our Christian spirituality, about where's God in all of this? And I think that that's a big question to ask ourselves, of where's God in a time and in all of this? I don't think that any of us feel like God's not here. And yet we still ask the question, why are we in the mess that we're in? And what's God's perspective on it? So we talked about Job with this idea of that which I feared has come upon me. And I want to tell a little story out of the book of John about the disciples and Jesus, and an event that happened to them, really. I mean, Jesus was involved, but I want to tell you, it was an event that happened to them, not Jesus. Yeah, the funny thing is, Jesus always has the upper hand, doesn't he? I love that, because he understands so much more than we do. And we get so worked up over such little things. And then Jesus shows up on the scene, and in an instant, the woman caught in adultery's dignity is restored. The woman at the well, he says, I'll give you living water. And he stands up at the great feast and says, if any man is thirsty, let him come to me. And if you believe in me, out of your innermost being will flow these rivers of living water. Because God always shows up in the midst of our lives. And that's the thing that I think compels me to be who I am and to do what I do. By being a Christian and being a pastor and a proclaimer of the things of God, is the idea that, man, God always shows up, even when we don't think he's there or we can't see. So we're going to be in Luke, we're going to be in John chapter 6. We're going to pick up, and we're going to be in verse 15. So while I'm getting a drink of coffee, if you would turn into your Bibles to John chapter 6, verse 15, we'll tell this little story. It's only a few verses, but it's a great, great story. So let's set the scene first, because I think that's important. So Jesus just now finished feeding 5,000 people. And the disciples were there with him, but the disciples, if you read the four texts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, and it's there in all four texts, and if you put it all together, you realize Jesus was really frustrated with them because they missed what Jesus was doing, and they missed the magnitude in who he was. Long story short, he feeds the 5,000, and in this narrative story that we're talking about here in the book of John, the people, because Jesus fed them, they want to force him and make him their king. But Jesus has different plans than that. Jesus, knowing that his popularity was at an all-time high, I mean, gosh, feed 5,000 people, I think you would be your popularity would be at an all-time high. Well, Jesus, knowing that that wasn't his destiny, really, and that he had a greater destiny than being the king of just that nation, he takes his time and withdraws from the people to go up onto a mountain and spend some alone time with God. While he's up there, the disciples are sending the people away, and they send the people away, and they've got instructions to go back to Capernaum, where they were from. There's different accounts of where they went after that, but they're going to get in their boat and they're going to head back to Capernaum. Well, Jesus goes up to the mountain to pray. And the disciples are sitting there and they're waiting for Jesus to come back and get in the boat so they can go home across the sea. But Jesus doesn't show up. He's up on the mountain spending time with his Father, the person that he loves the most. All of the universe. All of the universe. All of the universe that the Father and him created through the Son. And he's spending time with the Father, and the disciples are waiting. And they're waiting. And they're waiting. Well, they finally decide, as the disciples would, that they've got to get in the boat and go back. Well, if Jesus isn't going to show up, what are we going to do? Sit out here and be cold? We might as well get in the boat and go home, guys. Guys, get in the boat. So here these fishermen get in this boat, and they start rowing out, rowing out, rowing out. And so we pick up that story as they're leaving now, and they're rowing across the ocean, the Sea of Galilee, and they're headed back. What the text says was to Capernaum. So we'll pick up in verse 15. It says, Jesus then leaving and going up to pray. So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force and to make him king, meaning the people, withdrew again to a mountain to be alone with himself. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into the boat, they started across the sea to Capernaum. It had already been dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. And the sea began to be stirred, and because there was a strong wind that was blowing. Then, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened. And he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Like I said, it was a short story, and not a lot of verses there, and yet I want to suggest to you that it's a very profound story indeed. Now, it can be a profound story that we tell about Jesus back then. But the real idea and the real notion is how does that story relate to us today? Because it's a story about Jesus and about the disciples, but how does it relate to you? How does it relate to me? Well, I want you to see yourself as one of the disciples in the boat. And you're rowing out in this boat. And as you're getting out there, man, you're experienced. You're just an experienced fisherman. You're experienced with the boat. So you get out there, and as you're rowing, this wind blows up, and you can't see that it's coming necessarily from across the sea because it's dark out. And all of a sudden, this wind and these waves are upon you. And you're going, we got to row. We got to row. We got to get to the other side. We're going to perish if we don't get to the other side. And so all of a sudden, there's this sense of urgency. And there's this sense of fear that comes over you because you realize you don't have this. You don't have this all together. And quite frankly, if something doesn't happen quickly, there's a great chance that you could perish. You put yourself in that picture, and you're just going and you're rowing. I don't know if you've ever been in a position where you knew you were in danger and you knew that you were out of control. And you also probably knew that in the midst of this, I can tell you one thing, and that's I need a miracle from God. Well, that's about where these disciples were. And so they're in the midst of this time and in this rowing and trying to get through it. And there's all these thoughts that are going through their mind. And they're dealing with fears they've never dealt with. And all of the circumstances that they never thought they would be in as fishermen. And yet it kind of begs the question, How does that story relate to us today? And I think the idea for us where we are today, because we're dealing with a coronavirus, we're dealing with a market meltdown, we're not feeling good about what's going on in the world today, that we're somewhat like those fishermen in that boat, aren't we? I mean, we've been going through life and we're going through life and going through life. Everything's looking good. The economy's up. Everybody's working. Everybody's buying new houses. Everybody's got their new gadgets and their widgets, and all things are well. And all of a sudden, in the midst of it comes this storm. Maybe it started off small, but man, I'm telling you, this storm grew fast, didn't it? And all of a sudden, now we find ourselves and we're rowing the same way that these disciples were rowing in this boat, and we're not getting anywhere. And it's a wave after wave after wave that's hitting us, isn't it? There's the wave of the media. The media has very little good to say about any of this. If we turn on the TV and we watch, what do we find? We find bad news, bad news. Well, this happened and that happened. And we sit there and watch the news and watch the news and watch the news. And it's wave after wave after wave of all this hype and all this fear. Well, you decide you're going to get away from the news. You go to the internet. And you get on the internet and you've got everybody in there with wave after wave of this bad news. To make it worse, you go to the internet and you've got all these Christians out there talking about how this is God's wrath, or this is the end of the world, or they're going to inject you with a vaccine that's going to give you the mark of the beast, the 666, and everybody's out there running around frantic because there's these wave after wave. It's the wave coming over and crashing over the boat of the media. It's the wave of the internet. It's the wave of everybody that have got this apocalyptic doom in mind. And in the middle of it, you're sitting there going, somehow, I need a miracle from God. We listen to the TV, we listen to the radio, and we go to bed agitated, anxious, in fear. And we wake up in the morning and we turn on the TV, only to hear that the market's gone down, it's melted down more. New stories about the coronavirus and what it does, or who's got it, and what they're doing about it. We've got Italy in the news. We've got China in the news. Heck, we got France in the news. We got America. We got everybody in the news over this. And it just builds your anxiety. And you watch it for a while, and it's a rerun after a rerun, a loop after a loop. And after about 3 or 4 hours of that, you go and you get on your computer. And you get on your computer, and there's somebody up there talking about how this is the end of the world and how God's wrath is falling upon people, or whatever the case might be, and how this is one of the signs of the apocalypse. And with all of that, you just simply are anxious and uncertain. And you don't find God. It feels like Jesus isn't in the boat. And you're rowing, and you're rowing, and you're rowing. And all of a sudden, you see a figure coming. And it startles you. You go, what's going on here? And all of a sudden, as it gets closer, you realize it's Jesus. And all of a sudden, you're afraid. And you're like, good God, it's not just a matter of the fact that I got these waves, but I got this ghost that's coming at me. God help! And Jesus looks at you and says, don't be afraid. It's me. I'm here. Now, they could do one of two things. They could say, I don't think you're Jesus. Get away from me. You're not Jesus. Or they could say, would you please get in the boat with me and make me feel better about this? And the idea is sometimes in the midst of this, you can get so wrapped up in the waves, and you can get so wrapped up on it's going to be the end time, the rapture is going to happen, which I don't think that's going to happen, guys. And you can be in the midst of all that stuff that you don't see Jesus. That you don't see Jesus on the other side of the wave saying, I'm here. Will you let me into the boat? And the text says, and they received him into the boat. So I have a question to ask you. I have a question to ask myself. It's not a question that I'm asking. I think it's a question that he's asking. In the midst of our turmoil today, and the fact that we're going to have to face this, and that we're going to have to go back to work, and we're going to have to embrace uncomfortable situations that we don't necessarily want to embrace. The question I think that Jesus is asking is, can you look past the waves and just invite me into your boat? Can I get in this with you? Can you turn the TV off for a while? Can you turn the internet off for a while? Can you just shut down some of the Facebook stuff that's out there for a while? Can you put off and just shut down the doomsday prophets for a while? And let me get into the boat and take you to the other side? That's the question. So I want to ask you a question. Will you say yes? Will you say yes with me that you can get in the boat with me? Will you say yes, in the midst of all of this, I know that you're beyond this. I know that above and beyond of this, I know my Redeemer lives, and I know I'm going to stand with him on that. On the other side of this, I'm going to stand with him. So I'm asking you, apart from whatever our faith tradition is, will you just simply say yes to God? I'm going to say yes. And I hope that you will as well. So Father, I pray right now that in the midst of where we are and what's going on, that we would realize that you want to be received into our boats, into our hearts, into our lives, apart from everything and anything. Father, as a man, I just want to receive you into my boat.